this morning, guess what? My topic is we are healed, whole, and healthy. And so we've been saving that song for a couple of weeks. I know we did it a while back. But what was interesting for me was to consider what that phrase actually means when we say we are healed, whole, and healthy. When any one of us says, I am healed, whole, and healthy. And I thought I'd do a little exploring. Because we're getting ready to do this class that begins next Thursday evening for 8 weeks, where we explore that question and some possible answers to it together. And I know that there are a lot of cultural and inherited preconceived notions about what it means to be healed, to be whole, to be healthy. And I have a sneaky suspicion that they're quite limiting, and they might be keeping us from recognizing just how marvelous we already are, just how wonderful our lives already are. So before we do that, I was looking at some quotes from Ernest Holmes in one of the chapters in the textbook that is about the body. And I noticed that a couple concepts sort of rose to the surface, and they made a wonderful acronym for body, which is H-O-M-E, home. One way to think about having a body in all of this is that it's a place to call home, a home base in time and space, a home in infinity. It's kind of nice, you know, they say that time is a construction of our very own, but it is nice to know sort of where your spot is, to have a point of reference in all of this, because if you don't, you might just feel lost. So home, this acronym came from the following words that are buried in these quotes I'll be sharing with you. First, H is for harmonious, and O is for out-picturing. So we have harmonious, out-picturing. M is for manifestation. So we have a harmonious out-picturing, which is a manifestation. And E is for evolved, and what I'm going to read to you in a moment. And of course, evolving, because that's something which actually has no beginning and never ends. So there's an evolution. So a harmonious out-picturing, a manifestation which has evolved to wherever it is at this moment and continues to evolve, is one way to imagine this home that we call our bodies as well as what we know as our lives. And of course, when we consider these concepts of being healed, whole, and healthy, they are physical and so much more than that, because we are whole beings. So if we begin with this concept of harmony, harmonious, Ernest Holmes says, if we are to be well and happy, not only the body, but the mind must also be peaceful and harmonious. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Harmony. How could we have harmony in one part of our lives when we're experiencing disharmony in another? It's not really possible. However, when we focus our attention on harmony, being a spiritual principle, anything unlike it, I love to say this, just dissolves in the light of this truth. You can imagine that anything unlike that spiritual principle of harmony, when you focus upon it and you do more than think about it, when you can bring yourself to a place of feeling it, it automatically resolves anything other than it, dissolves anything other than it. You could imagine that disharmony would bow or kneel or transform in the presence of harmony. So simply to focus on that principle, no matter what is going on, will resolve disharmony in your experience. Now, sometimes the highest order of this is when you're in traffic and you've already managed to get this idea that you're going to be late, and you've already managed to notice this appearance of many other people on that path in front of you, perhaps going slower than you believe you need to go in order to get where you'd like to be. And you know, the more that you grab on and embrace disharmony and obstruction, the more of it you get. If you say, I'm going to be late, and maybe use some colorful terms to really hit your point home. If you can breathe and know that all is in perfect order, that everything is relating harmoniously, and that everyone, including you, is getting from their point of origin to their destination in perfect time, in grace and ease. You see how you feel even when those words are mentioned? That will get the lights to turn green and those people to move. But if you object, if you fight, you'll have another experience. So there's a lot to be said about harmony in this life. Now, what about out-picturing? Ernest Holmes, he uses some funny words in this textbook, and we were just talking earlier about how some of them are real mind benders, and you just have to say them over and over again and read and sort and until things click into place. I chose out-picturing rather than objective because I thought it would be a start in that direction. Here's the quote. The simplest way to think of the body is to realize that it is the objective manifestation of a subjective mind and consciousness. Also, we should not say, here's a mind bender for you, that consciousness is in the body, but rather that the body is in consciousness. Now that's a new idea. I mean, do you realize, in our culture and in, the thousands of years of trying to understand and pass on the best of what we think we know, don't we kind of believe that, I have this body and it's a vessel, it's a container, whatever. Container's a real buzzword these days. But it's something in which I have my consciousness, in which I have my identity. And it turns out that that's backwards. It turns out that actually we are, thank goodness, as I said, having a point of awareness within the mind of God. And having a point of beingness, of experience, of expression within the body and the life of Spirit, Creator, the Absolute. We're within something that is infinite, and we're part of it. You can see why it's good, like I said, to have a reference point, to have a home base. But it's more like this place where you put down your stake or drop your anchor, and you travel within this, and there's no limit to it. So if you think of this idea that your body is this thing, this point of experience within infinity, in consciousness, which has no end, that's different from, I have a little drop of spirit in my physical form. When we say that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, we still, come into this world and grow up in it, and we're immersed in it, and we're so busy in it, waking and sleeping, that we can really begin to think that we are our bodies. We can think that we have, like I said, just a speck of awareness, of consciousness within us, and the rest, we're just working it out, with blood, sweat, and tears, and elbow grease, and whatever else. Maybe crack a bunch of books and do our best. But what if we're actually swimming in consciousness and our bodies are just a place that we call home within it, and there's no limit to it? That shifts how we think about our bodies. So learning to see that our bodies are outward manifestations of consciousness is a little bit easier when we realize this about ourselves. They're outward manifestations. You've heard this line that life is an inside job. So if we begin to consider that this is an outpicturing, a manifestation of consciousness, which is not just in here, but it is also out there, and oh, that gets a little confusing. I'll tell you, we have our personal experience of both the objective and the subject. We have our personal experience of conscious and subconscious. We have our personal experience of the infinite as finite. It's a lot. But those ideas help us to understand that actually our bodies, and you'll always hear me talking about the bodies of our affairs, are outpicturings of something that starts in consciousness and moves outward into the physical realm. That's a lot of information. So, outpicturing is followed by manifestation in my little acronym here, and of course, those two things are really the same. But what Holmes says about this is that perhaps the human body is an exact counterpart of an invisible body, which is non-material, as we now understand matter and physical form. We know that more now than they did in 1926 or 1938. When they used to write, when Holmes and others used to write about these invisible aspects of life and so on, they used the term ethers. They were always talking about the ethers, this mysterious, undefinable thing. Now we have things like Kirlian photography. Anybody heard of Kirlian photography? Yeah. Well, for example, it's Richard Gerber has done a great deal of work on energetic healing. And he gives the example of how in Kirlian photography, you take a photograph, a Kirlian photograph of a leaf, and what you see is the outline of the leaf in its completion. Then when you cut off a part of the leaf and you take the photograph of the leaf again, that part that you removed is still there. So could it be that actually this statement is really true? Our bodies are the exact counterpart of an invisible body, which actually we have the opportunity to understand a lot more than we did back in the 20s and 30s. There's all kinds of science to make this clear, help us understand, to prove that that is so. Energy healers work in this realm all the time. They work in this realm where everything is taking shape. You could call it the pre-physical realm. If you think about the creative process moving from logos, mind, into the energetic body, if you will, before showing up in physicality, there's an opportunity to do work there, to rearrange, to identify and rearrange patterns. So what shows up in the physical is different. And what licensed practitioners of the science of mind and other mental healers do, like us, is to help people to initiate new patterns from just before that, so that they will show up energetically and physically in a new way. So there's nothing really mysterious about that. But Kirlian photography is an example of how that pattern exists before it takes form. And what does that say about you and me? What does that say about our bodies? The other thing has to do with evolving. And Ernest Holmes, of course, had a few things to say about that as well. First of all, whether you're looking at the old 1926 textbook or the new one, there are references to this concept that we were initially created with our basic, you'd say, we know when you buy a car that's a base model, factory, what is that called? Anyway, you know, it's got windows that you have to do by hand. And you can add features from there. But the basic stuff is there. It does what it's supposed to do. And Ernest Holmes has this idea that when we become aware, when we say, oh, I am that I am, and go from there, we get to continue to evolve by conscious choice. He says nature waits upon man's discovery. He says that if we, and I'll share this as it's written here, the physical body is evolved for the purpose of allowing consciousness to function on this plane. The body is necessary on this plane since only through a physical body can we properly function here. Sounds like, a special vehicle for a space mission or something, And we've heard at this point all kinds of interesting terms to describe this biofeedback something or other suit, mixing up things that different people have said. But he says also, nothing is more apparent than that man, as he now appears, is the result of evolution. But in order to evolve, he had to have a principle from which to unfold. And since man is intelligent, he must have evolved from an intelligent cause. Further, in studying the order of man's evolution, it seems certain that it was necessary, from the time that he was brought to a point of self-choice, that he must be left alone to discover his true nature. So the point of self-choice is where you roll off the factory line and go, oh, I am that I am. Now, if everything were just laid out before you without you having the opportunity to discover it, would you be in the image and likeness of your Creator? Would you be Spirit, God, Creator-like if it was all decided for you? Would it mean anything if you didn't discover it in your own time and in your own way? Would you be free if it was just all done and taken care of? Of course not. So the interesting thing about evolution is that you start with your base model. That was the word I was searching for. And the rest, it's up to you, it's up to me, it's up to each and every one of us. And it happens in our perfect time. Our perfect time. I was thinking about this, that if we have this evolution, which has no beginning and no end, and we recognize that we are conscious awareness and beingness within infinity, doesn't comparison and competition look silly? I thought so. I can really get myself bent out of shape sometimes when I focus on where someone else is, and it's a representation of where I'd like to be. And instead of allowing that to inspire me, I allowed it to frustrate me. And I thought, oh darn, those people who are already there and I'm not. Well, that doesn't do me any good. It does not speed up my evolution by any means. It might provide some fertilizer to maybe, increase the amount of fermentation. Our guest, Reverend Sheldon, last week was talking about this time of year as being one where we are naturally frustrated with all of this stuff that's wanting to be born in our lives, and it can feel a little messy. It can feel a little frustrating, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be when all kinds of new stuff is happening. So I was thinking about this in terms of evolution, once again. If we're on an infinite spectrum, then why do we waste our time comparing and competing with one another and fearing that we won't get ours? Perhaps if we're all discovering exactly what we need to discover when we're ready to discover it, it comes in the perfect package, in the perfect ways, at the perfect time for us, and that's all we need to know. And somebody else's timetable, somebody else's purpose, somebody else's business, probably we would be best to leave alone and focus on our own, genuinely and well. Now that sounds more like conscious evolution to me. So we have that. And we have these ideas again about being healed, whole, and healthy. I'm wondering, just since the past few minutes have gone by, if your concepts of being healed, whole, and healthy have begun to shift. So, if we're all in our perfect and right place, we're all in our perfect harmonious outpicturing, a perfect manifestation and evolving beingness, our perfect point of awareness and beingness within infinity, and each one is unique. What does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to be well? I want to share a couple of examples with you. Get this out of here. So, does healthy mean, does healed mean that you have to be completely restored to factory condition? No. It's kind of silly, isn't it? That for anyone who is taller or shorter or more this or less that than another isn't right in some way? And what about this? Whole is a leaf which has had part of it trimmed off, no longer whole. And what constitutes health? What about somebody whose eyesight isn't that great and their other senses compensate? And so they might have acute hearing, which is really superior to the hearing of another person who has perfect eyesight. What does that make them? I'm holding this because I walked out of Oceana yesterday. Okay, I told you where my favorite place is. Darn. Anybody seen the Jupiter Courier this week? Well, I recognize this young man because he's one of my cousin's sons. And last time I saw them was at our wedding a year ago. And as soon as we said I do, they went and jumped in the water because they're surfers. So this is Fisher Grant. His brother Kieran was born deaf. And he has a cochlear implant. But he can't wear it in the water. And their dad got them, and their sister has a hearing impairment too, and so does their father. And he's a surfer. It got them all involved in surfing from a very, very, very early age. And this family, they've written a story about the whole family, that how they have not allowed deafness to hold them back, but to propel them forward. So they work together. They work together. Fisher is not hearing impaired, and he's a champion surfer. And Kieran can't hear. But through signals from Fisher on the water and his family on the shore, he knows when the competition begins. He knows when it ends. And he has his own feel for the water that has allowed him to become a champion. He cannot hear the roar of the surf. He cannot hear the horn that's starting or stopping a race or a competition. He can't hear any of that. Is he anything less than whole or healthy? The other one that I've shared is that I met this young lady who, and if you've been around for a while, you've heard me tell this story before. Her parents went to the Center for Spiritual Living where I was trained in Asheville, North Carolina. And I went to the gym that I belonged to up there, and there she was, this young woman, in the kickboxing class. I could see her from the treadmill. I was running on the treadmill. I'd run and work out, go to the Whole Foods, and then go to my Science of Mind class, right? So it was a really great night. But I would see through the glass partition, there she was in her kickboxing class. And I saw her in the locker room before and afterwards. She had been adopted into a family in the United States and had been, she had lost both of her legs from the knees down to a landmine and one of her hands. So she had prostheses from here down. And she had one hand with beautiful, red fingernails, and the other one was just, what was left there. And she was in that kickboxing class every night. She really showed me a lot about wholeness, a lot about health, and a lot about carrying on. Then we were at a workshop together for a New Year's Day fire walk, and she decided she was going to hang out with me. And her parents were like, oh, and she said, I want to walk. And my parents said I could just sit, I want to sit with you, and I'm going to do this workshop together. And the teachers were like, I don't know. Is there an exception to spiritual principle when you have really expensive prostheses rather than your own legs? Does belief really work that far? Everybody walked, and she did too. And there was not a dry eye on that whole piece of property. She walked that whole length of the fire walk on her prosthetics, and they were unchanged because her belief was that strong, And now she's happily married, and she lives in Hawaii, and she's on Facebook all the time, and she's just this amazing, amazing woman still. So what do you think now about what it means to be healed or whole or healthy? What do you think now about your gifts, your handicaps? Maybe you used to call them that about an hour ago. What do you think now about what you can do well and what you can't do so well? What do you think now about what makes you want to just go for it? What do you think now about your perceived limitations? What do you think now about what it means to be whole? There's a unifying principle in all of this. You could call it the moral of the story this morning. And that's this concept of perfection. The back of all life is that pattern of, that idea of perfection. Is that what makes that blueprint for the leaf, for you, for me? Isn't that what makes all life? And isn't this body and the body of our affairs and this whole experience just an outpicturing of perfection? Perhaps if you're like me, you learned that word initially seemed to represent one person. I actually never bought that. My parents didn't buy that, so I was really blessed with them, rejecting that idea. And then I had to get over my prejudices in order to come back and have a spiritual life of my own. Was perfection and is perfection limited to one being born 2,000 and some odd years ago? Or was it not taught that we are all that? Is it actually not taught by so many more, past, present, and surely future, that perfection is within each and every one of us? And it's not, the latest, greatest model. It's not a certain height or hair color or width or weight or IQ or this or that. Perfection is in everything. If you think about perfection as a spiritual principle, just like consciousness, it's not like you got a little bit in you. You are dwelling in perfection. Perfection is infinite, and there is no one and nothing outside of perfection. So that means that who you are and how you are and as you are and where you are and whatever you're up to, whatever you did and whatever you're going to do, it's all within perfection. That's what allows us to see ourselves and one another differently. So I'll just end with the invitation to think about these examples that I've shared with you, and maybe some others that come to mind, and realize you're no different. You're no different. You may have thought you had limitations. You may have thought that there's some reason why you can't do something, but if you're still here, you can. Right? So we're just going to close this with treatment, and I welcome you to anchor these ideas as we close our eyes together. I speak my word in recognition of this truth, knowing that each time I do and we do take the time to know the truth, we make room for it as our experience. because it is ever present, inexhaustible, awaiting our discovery. And so what I know is that Spirit is infinite, all-knowing, all-loving, ever-perfect, ever-present, ever-living. And I recognize that each and every one of us is one with it, made by it, out of it, in its image and in its likeness. We are perfect. We are healed, whole, and healthy. We were never anything else. We are now and always will be exactly that. And so in gratitude for this and all of the beautiful ways that it shows up, I give thanks. I know it is done. I know it is true. I know the gift has been given. And together, as we open our eyes, we say, in whole agreement, in full agreement. And so it is.
So it is.
Thank you.